Welcome to Virtual Book Signing. My name is Bjorn Skaptason, and we are webcasting to you today from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago, which is almost always where you hear from us. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have two great authors and three great books to talk about, so let's jump right into our topic for the day. Our topic for the day does come from the field of military history, partially because the annual convention of the Society for Military Historians was held in suburban Chicago this year, just this past weekend. And so our two scholars come to us after having attended that meeting. Both, we want to thank the University of North Carolina Press for getting our authors to us today. Both of our books are published by the University of North Carolina Press, one of the great sources for Civil War writing historically and in the future. Let me remind you that we are live. We are webcasting to you live, so if you have any questions today, please feel free to email or instant message in questions for us. We will give the questions to the authors and they will answer the questions for you. If you're interested in buying the book, feel free to order the book. They'll sign it for you. We'll ship it right out for you. If you want to buy, if you want to buy the books as gifts for all of your friends, you can do that too. They'll sign it just the same, and we'll ship it out to your homes. Our authors today. First, Joseph T. Glatthaar is here, and I'm going to show the two books that we're going to feature today. Joe is the Stevenson Distinguished Professor of History at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Is the author of Partners in Command, the relationships between leaders in the Civil War. Has also wrote many years ago one of my favorite Civil War books, Forged in Battle, The Civil War Alliance of Black Soldiers and White Officers. And Joe is the president now of the Society for Military Historians. Congratulations, Joe.
Thank you.
I know that's going to be fun for for you. Our other guest today is Dr. Wei-Siang Hsieh, and Wayne is the author of West Pointers in the Civil War, The Old Army in War and Peace, from University of North Carolina Press, originally published in 2009. Wayne is assistant professor of history at the United States Naval Academy, but also holds a position at Yale University currently. What is the position you have right now?
I'm technically the Chauncey Fellow at the International Security Studies at Yale.
At Yale, outstanding. But Wayne has also served the government, the State Department, as on a provincial reconstruction team in Iraq. So that's service for which you deserve thanks and recognition.
I actually did the page proofs for the book, believe it or not, in Iraq.
Oh, did you? You did the page proofs for this book in Iraq? And that brings up, I'm going to backpedal right away, brings up a great story that Pete Cousins works for the Foreign Service, and he happened to be in Peru back in the 90s when they were laying siege to the embassy, and he used the downtime during the siege to finish his book on Chickamauga. So foreign service is one way for a historian to provide some public service, in addition to what they do. Also, Joe, we are providing the opportunity to buy your 2009 publication. Is that what it is?
Yes.
General Lee's Army, from Victory to Collapse. So, West Pointers in the Civil War, University of North Carolina Press, 2009. The cost is $30. If you want to order a copy, we'll send it right out to you with the signature. And Soldiering in the Army of Northern Virginia is $50, also from University of North Carolina Press. And we can sell you a paperback copy of General Lee's Army, which is now out of print in cloth, for $18.95. We do have a few out-of-print first editions. So if you're interested, if you're a collector and you're interested in getting a signed first edition of General Lee's Army, now is one of your rare opportunities to get that. So gentlemen, let's get the discussion started. Let me start with you, Joe. Can you tell us a little bit about the study that brought us to soldiering in the Army of Northern Virginia, what is the nature of that book, and what is its relation to General Lee's Army from Victory to Collapse?
One of the reasons that I did this study was that I had come to the conclusion that we were cherry-picking evidence from various letters and diaries and conveying impressions about soldiers' letters, but we didn't have any hard data, and that hard data was attainable. So what I did was I created, with the help of an expert in sampling, a random sample of 600 soldiers. And they were 150 infantry, 150 artillery, 150 cavalry, 300 infantry. Lee's army had about almost 82% infantry, 11% cavalry, and 7% artillery. So I had to balance that and weight the sample. The sample is what's called a stratified cluster sample. In effect, it's a glorified means and complicated means of creating a random sample when we don't have a complete list of all the soldiers who served in Lee's army. And it was a very tortuous experience just getting the names for the sample, because we had no list. So I would have to go through compiled service records on microfilm and count the 857th soldiers paper who came, which might require me to go through, say, 5 reels of microfilm counting before I got to 857, and that's just getting the guy's name. And then I would have to compile the data. And I also included census data. I found about 91% of the soldiers in the census, which is quite extraordinary, almost 92%. And then I looked at pension files, obituaries, county histories, sometimes regimental histories after the war would have biographical information. So I drew from a wide range of sources to accumulate my sample. And then I learned a computer program called Stata and was able to crunch my own numbers. And then I have a friend who was at the time the state demographer of Texas, Carl Eschbach, who gave me some advice on how to do this to make sure I was doing it right, and then examined all my statistics to make sure that they were correct. And so I accumulated all the information, put it into a database, and began crunching my numbers in Stata, and then organized them in various chapters. So each of the branches of the service has a chapter, and then there will be other ways to slice the data to get a better understanding of Lee's army. So Upper South versus Lower South, or officers and enlisted men, married soldiers versus single soldiers, those with children, those without children, slaveholders versus non-slaveholders, different economic classes based on their total assets, that is personal wealth and real estate wealth in the census. And so there are different ways of slicing the data. Oh, northern and southern born soldiers versus northern and foreign born soldiers versus southern born soldiers. So there are all sorts of ways of looking at the Army, and that was my intention. When I wrote General Lee's Army, only a fraction of the statistics went into the book. And so Gary Gallagher convinced me to write a statistics book, which is a wonderful reference book, but it's not something that you'll pick up and read cover to cover at bedtime. I have
to confess that I did not myself get all the way through soldiering in the Army of Northern Virginia in one reading. But I should say, and I think we talked about this earlier, the result of that database, the original result of that database, General Lee's Army, is one of the most fascinating studies of an army written in what I would call a traditional historian's qualitative format that I've read in a long, long time. And I think most of the history community agrees with me, since it's so hard for me to even get a cloth-bound copy of that book anymore to sell to people. So, I mean, they're an excellent example of how a scholar goes through this statistical exercise to arrive at a work that is very accessible to a casual reader of history. Wayne, what brought you to, you wrote about a different army than he did. The U.S. Army, mostly or partially at another time, in another place. A lot of the same people in a different army. Tell us about West Pointers in the Civil War and about the old army. How did you get to that Chicago?
The book came out of a dissertation I wrote at the University of Virginia under the direction of Gary Gallagher and Eddie Ayers. I had the topic. I knew I wanted to work on West Point graduates, which is it's commonly known that West Pointers were significant in the high command echelons for both armies. And that's how I started. And of course, with every work of scholarship, it's sort of, you hope at least, to answer the so what question. Right? I mean, so, okay, well, if you want to go beyond sort of simply sort of antiquarian curiosity, you have to do that. And the conclusion I found was that the so what, the sort of the lead for the importance of this was that that the very similar backgrounds, institutional backgrounds, as embodied in large part by the common military training, and West Point's the sort of the shorthand of it. It's more than just West Point. It's really what I call the old army, but West Point is a crucial role in that. That common background because is sort of bequeathed to both armies, and it creates a situation where both armies have what I call an equilibrium of competence, meaning that they both therefore have roughly comparable levels of military proficiency. And that because of this helps explain in part why the war lasts as long as it does. Because neither side has a dramatic advantage in professional competence. Both sides are reliant on these folks because they're the only people really in mid-19th century America who know how to run an army, even though their expertise in many ways is profoundly flawed. And that both learn at similar rates. So they both come in with similar levels of knowledge. They both acquire proficiency expertise at similar rates, and this helps explain why the war lasts as long as it does, which of course has implications for things like emancipation, the war's social effects. You know, this is all closely linked with the length of the war. So that was sort of the most important, I think, aspects of the argument.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I noticed in the book is that, and you touched upon it in your introduction here, is that the leaders of both of these armies come not just from West Point necessarily,
Yes.
although you use that in the title of the book, but they come from this old army. They come from this old army culture. Now, what did you find out about the roots of the old army culture? I mean, they both came from the same culture that it didn't have to exist really, but it did in the early Republican period. They decided to have it.
Yes, my book is I hope unique, maybe just peculiar, but I hope unique. In that I really start in 1814. I mean, that's what makes the book in some ways a lot. I mean, so, and the professionalization of the American Army is in large part driven by the military problems that are seen in the War of 1812. And where, although the United States does reasonably well at the end of it, Washington is burned, the early campaigns in Canada are fiascos, and soldiers like Winfield Scott feel this very keenly. So, along with John Calhoun, who many people don't realize the early part of his career is a fierce nationalist and an incredibly effective Secretary of War. So he and Scott put through, along with various other important Army officers, put in through a series of professional reforms where they basically build a small but reasonably competent, by European standards, Army. And this is very basic. I mean, I'm not talking about, you should not imagine something like the armies of post-Napoleonic Europe. Things like having a common infantry drill manual, so you have at least some common basis of training. Things like finally determining what kind of artillery you're going to have. Mm-hmm. Having common guns, common drill, common tactics. This is the kind of the basic level of expertise. And despite funding problems and all sorts of struggles, they're able to create this. And this creates this apparatus that is essentially the generals of the Civil War grow up in this army. Mm-hmm. And a lot of their assumptions and their knowledge comes out of this. And West Point is very important here. In the dissertation, actually, the title of the dissertation was actually The Old Army War and Peace. And that's really what it should be, but in all honesty, the press wanted to sell more books. Right? But West Point is crucial, because West Point is where most of these officers get their initial set of training, but it also becomes the professional centerpiece, because the faculty are the most professionally aware officers. And West Point has this big library that nowhere else the Army has. So it is justifiable. But you're right, it's really a story, I think, of institutions. And West Point is simply a very useful shorthand, mm-hmm. basically, for getting at the significance of those institutions.